Hello to my Zero subscribers. Today I'm going to talk about Tintin, one of the most influential comic series in Europe and one of my personal favourites. It spanned 24 volumes and has had multiple adaptations, most notably the incredibly fateful 1991 series, which aired on HBO, and the 2011 motion capture film, which I sort of liked. The books were written and illustrated by George Prosper Remy, aka Hergé, who released the first story, Land of the Soviets, in 1929 and continued to write the books all the way up until his death in 1983, with the incomplete last book, Tintin Alfort, being released in 1984. Even though the comic is probably at its most popular in Belgium where it was created, it's also pretty massive here in Britain. I became a massive fan when I read Cigars the Pharaoh at the age of 6, the fourth book in the series, and without a doubt the first good one. For reasons that will become clear soon, it's definitely for the best that I didn't read the preceding books first. The series really took a while to find its feet. In this series, I'll be covering all of the Tintin books, starting with the troubled early books, and working my way towards the troubled Tintin and the Picaros, and the incomplete Alfort. So let's begin with Tintin in the Lands of the Soviets. So the best thing I can say about the book is I really do like the cover. Tintin and Snowy seem off in retrospect, but they definitely look better than how they would throughout the actual story, probably because they're in colour. The mostly white background with the outline of St. Basil's Cathedral lends the cover a very eerie, mysterious quality. It's far from the best cover Hergé drew for the books, but let's just take any positives where we can here. I think even most Tintin fans would probably admit that Tintin himself isn't the best character. He was deliberately made to be a bit bland so that readers could project their own personalities onto him. Later on he'd have far more interesting characters to bounce off of, like Captain Haddock and Calculus and the Thompsons. Here he has some stereotypes and Snowy. I guess the dynamic he has with his dog is kind of charming, but overall he has little to him in this book other than being a bit smug and being inexplicably adept at combat. He's able to take down a fucking bear despite being scrawny and pint-sized. The stereotypes might be a little bit much for a lot of modern readers. The Russians have little depth beyond being either blood-sucking commies or poor victimized villagers. And the Chinese characters have the most utterly stereotypical look and manner imaginable for the time. And it's something Hergé would later go out of his way to subvert, so it's a bit odd seeing it here. This is going to be kind of hard to cover because the story here amounts to little more than Tintin wandering around Russia for a bit and getting into wacky hijinks with the Soviets. Plot really takes a back seat for the satire, and the satire, for what it is, isn't all that bad. It's worth noting that Hergé didn't have full creative control this early on. He was told by his boss Norbert Wallace to make his story a critique of the Soviet Union. We have stuff like Tintin being arrested for not having his papers, the people of Russia being threatened at gunpoint to vote for the Communist Party, and people being tortured for the most minor offences. It's definitely a little broad and paints a very black and white, simplistic picture. But there is some truth to the voting thing. People were supposedly blackmailed into supporting the Communist Party. Of course, not so blatantly. It is funny to think that a comic that's become so widely regarded as a children's series had such overt, cynical satire early on. But there was quite a lot of satire in later books as well. It just tended to be a little more subtle than this. It's also worth noting that Hergé would later on make a point to research countries he wrote about, leading to far more well-rounded critiques and portrayals. It's hard to read through the book in one go due to the lack of narrative drive and the continuous formula of Tintin getting into danger only for a deus ex machina to save him, but I'm not entirely sure I can fault Hergé for this, since it was originally written to be a serialised story in Les Petites Volumes, with a new page added every day. It was never really intended to be read in one go. The Deus Ex Machinas would become a staple of the series, though not quite as prominent later on. You do kind of start to wonder if Tintin might just be incredibly lucky as opposed to particularly competent. Okay, seriously, why the fuck was there a diving suit in a fucking prison cell? Hergé would later become an amazing artist, with incredibly detailed backgrounds, contrasting beautifully with charmingly simple character designs. But when he was making the book, he had yet to develop his considerable skills. The artwork here is very basic, with minimal background and a very inconsistent look for Tintin. The characters generally look kind of unappealing as well, though in some cases that's definitely intentional. Notably, this was the only one of the earlier books to not get redrawn down the line. I honestly have no idea why it didn't, but Tintin in the Congo did. Hergé was quite embarrassed by this book, and I can easily see why, to be honest. You can tell that he hadn't fully developed his skills as a writer or artist yet, and since the story was largely dictated by his boss, it very clearly wasn't his vision for the series. If you want to get into the books, I really wouldn't recommend starting here. This was actually the last one I got around to reading, and it was really just for completion. It lacks much of the sophistication the series became known for, and it has aged quite badly. Not as badly as Tintin in the Congo, however, which we shall get to next time.